Welcome to Living Chronic, the podcast that explores the realities of living with chronic illness and disability while redefining how we thrive in our personal and professional lives. I'm your host, Brandy Shantz, a disabled veteran and chronic illness warrior, here to discuss the challenges, triumphs, and untapped potential of life with a chronic condition. Before we dive in, please take a minute to hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening. Now, let's change the way we think about disability together. This is Brandy Shantz, and you're listening to Living Chronic. Today I'm speaking with Gary Martocchio. He is an attorney. He works in employment law. He represents the clients against their employers when things have gone wrong in the workplace. So, welcome, Gary.
Thanks, Brandy. Appreciate you having me.
Now, I'm so happy you're here. It's been a rough month, so I know I had to reschedule. But poor you. You're used to working with people with various chronic illness and disabilities, so I'm sure you know our crazy lives.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, a lot of my practice covers individuals dealing with medical issues. There's some laws that protect employees that are going through things like that. The ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act. So um, those are two of the main laws that we work with, among a few others. But yeah, I'd say 50% or more of our cases are covering the ADA and or the
Hmm.
FMLA.
You know, there's a lot of distrust in the disabled and chronically ill communities when it comes to disclosing your disability or asking for accommodations. And while some of that mistrust may be misplaced in certain situations, I think a lot of that mistrust does come from experiences, both, you know, things that we've been through ourselves or what we've witnessed other people going through. So, what would you say to somebody who is very distrustful of even disclosing that they have a disability?
I totally get it. I understand there's a stigma that comes with it, and you're worried how the employer is going to treat you once you disclose it. But I think it's important to document that you have a disability. That's not something you necessarily need to do, during the interview process or anything like that. Um, in fact, employers shouldn't be asking you about that during that process. But um, if you are employed and you need time off for medical reasons, you need accommodations due to medical reasons, you need an adjusted schedule, anything along those lines, I would unequivocally state why. And what I find is a lot of employees that are dealing with medical stuff will make up some other reason, and that doesn't protect you, right?
Right.
They'll try to say it's hey, I need time off due to childcare, or they won't give a reason. You
Mhm.
want to be clear about it, because you have protections if you're missing time due to medical issues or you need an accommodation due to medical issues. So be clear, be concise about it, document it in writing. Um, that will trigger the employer to have to engage with you. And if they need more information or documentation, then you provide it. And I'd say most employers will cooperate. They understand the law, and the ones that don't, if you ever are going to have to bring a legal claim, then you want to have that documented because, I have a lot of situations where a client will come to me, and our biggest flaw of the case will be the lack of documentation.
Mhm.
And you want to be clear about it. I get why employees are uneasy about it, but it's only protecting yourself, and it puts the employer on notice, and that triggers certain responsibilities on their end as well.
It's what's interesting is I think this spans all people. Doesn't matter if you're, working in an admin position or if you're an executive at a company. I've always been very, well, I have not always been very open, but I am very open now discussing how many mistakes I made early because I was so scared of telling somebody I had a disability, telling them that I was dealing with chronic illness, and I hid my own. So, it's not just, that, oh, you were being silly. Oh, I was stupid. I didn't think to document. This really does span all sorts of different people because we're all going through the same thing in many ways. We're all scared on some level.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, you'll see it all over the place from employees that are dealing with jobs where that are very physically demanding. They're having physical restrictions or limitations to those dealing with um, mental disabilities. Where they need certain accommodations for that. To like you said, executive level positions. Maybe there's some restrictions on travel or hours that you're able to work, or the workload and whatnot. And yeah, if you need an accommodation, if you need time off related to a medical condition, be clear about it. Talk to your employer about it. HR is the typical route to go as far as sharing specifics on the condition, and you want to make sure that you're communicating, because it's only protecting yourself. And if not, you're kind of a fish out of water.
Hmm.
Because the employer can only be held liable for what they do know, and employers obviously don't want liability. So once they know, they're going to take a certain legal precautions that they need to, and if they don't, then you know you need to set yourself up, to take legal action if necessary. But most of the time, like I said, most employers will do the right thing, and
Right.
you want to. If you're a good worker, no one wants to lose an employee. They want to work with you. They want to try to make it work and make you comfortable. So, and again, if they're not that type of employer, then they're probably not going to be sympathetic to you if you're not disclosing your disability.
Right.
If they're not working with you when you do. So, I see no harm in being clear and documenting your condition with the employer.
This conversation is very timely for many reasons. The first being, we're still, well, I don't know what we want to call it, recovering from the pandemic, if you will. And the pandemic was so interesting in that so many people who had never worked from home before went home to work. And so many disabled people who were sitting at home unemployed suddenly found themselves able to be employed. Of course, now as we are past the end of the pandemic, we are recovering, we are whatever you want to call it, there's a big push of return to office. And as much as that pendulum swung in one direction, and unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot that we could do at that moment, everybody just had to go work from home. When it came to return to office, we seem to be swinging the other direction, and there's a lot of mass return to office. There's a lot of people scared of what might happen to them when there's a return to office because they do have chronic illnesses or disabilities that require them to be able to work from home at least part of the time. So, how much of this have you been dealing with in this kind of push pull right now of do we return to office? Should we not return to office? Hybrid work? What's a reasonable accommodation? What are you seeing right now?
Right. I think that last question you had, what's a reasonable accommodation? I think that's changed over the course of the last 5 years.
Hmm.
The way that the law looks at it is the accommodation reasonable? Are you able to perform the essential functions of your job? Now, let's say the accommodation is working remotely. Can you perform the essential functions of your job, and does it create an undue hardship on the business? That's the standard that you're looking at. That's the text of the law. And I think we've shown over the last 5 years that working remotely is a reasonable accommodation. You can perform the essential functions of your job. It's not creating a hardship on the business because we've been doing it for the last 5 years. So it's, you can look at, various professions and look at the metrics, and you can see, profits businesses are making and that have made with the workforce remote. So, um, it's definitely a topic. I spoke on a panel not too long ago, at a law school, here in the Tampa area, Stetson Law School, and this exact topic came up, and that was the answer that I gave. It was, what's a reasonable accommodation has changed. Now, have we seen the courts flush this out? Because the court's going to see how the laws are being interpreted, right? They're going to interpret the law for us, and I think the
Hmm.
interpretation is going to change over time as to, is it reasonable to work remotely? Before it was probably not, right? Probably not. Now I think you're seeing it change, and I think the court's interpretation is going to change. Um, and I've seen a lot of cases resolved before it gets to that point. I haven't seen one all the way through a judgment or an appeal, or a Supreme Court ruling myself, but I think a lot of employers are recognizing that the interpretation is going to change, and it's just a matter of time, and you're seeing a lot of cases like that resolve. more employees are being asked to come back to work that have proven that they can perform their job, and it's not creating a hardship on the business with them working remotely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really did change the landscape, and certainly on this show, and I've spoken about this in my business, had great conversations about this with various employers. When you bring disabled people back into the workforce, it's good for everybody. You get talented workers, often resilient, often very, nimble, able to adjust to change quickly. They're not on the public dime. You're getting people off of disability. You're getting them off of, other kinds of government aid. And of course, it's good for our mental health when we're employed. It's good for the community at large. There's so many benefits to it. So I'm always hoping and pushing that we continue to have very smart and thoughtful conversations around return to office. I myself love being able to collaborate in person sometimes, but as somebody with, n- well, now a few diseases, with Crohn's disease and dysautonomia, it is absolutely imperative that I be able to work from home from time to time. I just can't leave my house. So these kinds of things do keep us involved in our communities, and they're a tremendous benefit to everybody. It's not just a benefit to the employee. It's not just a benefit to the employer. There's so many benefits. They're just too long to list. Now, all that being said, another conversation we've been hearing about a lot. I had a I've had a big conversation about this on LinkedIn last week. It's the resume gap. The resume gap. So often people who are suffering from various chronic illnesses have to take time off work to deal with their illness. I have an interview that will be coming out this week with a woman. She was interviewed by Fortune magazine as well. She was a real rising star in IT. Then she was diagnosed with breast cancer. At the advice of her doctor, she took some time off work to focus on her health and her treatments and beating cancer. She beat cancer. So once she beat cancer, she said, "All right, that's it. I'm getting back into the workforce." Well, a year and a half later, she's still unemployed. Of course, the federal law says you cannot take that resume gap into consideration if it targets a specific protected group. But I think we all know that anybody with a resume gap, you're immediately pushed to the side, and disabled people are overlooked and often completely locked out of the workforce due to having to take some time off work to take care of their own illnesses. So, have you been seeing any specific cases around this? What are the difficulties around actually prosecuting something like this? Or are there other ways that we can advocate for disabled people to get companies to really not look at that resume gap and maybe even take a look at it and think of it as a growing experience with providing people with the kinds of resilience that every company says they want but doesn't necessarily hire?
Right. Yeah, I'd say the failure to hire cases are some of the most difficult to combat, just because if you're an employee and you're terminated and dealing with a medical issue, it's isolated. It's you, and
Hmm.
you're just battling against, okay, the company may have their reason, and here's my rebuttal to that, and all that stuff. But on the failure to hire, they're getting hundreds of resumes, and it's a little easier for them to say, look, one person got this, 99 people didn't. So it's not just you that we're targeting, right? Whereas if you were terminated,
Hmm.
so that's what makes those difficult. But I think the first thing I'd say, if you're dealing with something and you need to step away from work, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to resign your position. You can go on a leave of absence, even if that leave of absence is unpaid. Let's say short-term disability benefits run out, because you can use those concurrently with a medical leave. If you're FMLA eligible, that gives you at least 12 weeks of job protected leave. Um, there's some other requirements to meet eligibility under the FMLA. You have to be with the company 1 year. The company has to have 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius. So let's say you're FMLA eligible, that gives you 12 weeks of job protected leave. And most companies will grant you leave beyond that, albeit it may be unpaid, like I said. But I would recommend that. to those that may need to step away versus resigning. That way, you don't get as far of a resume gap. And like I said, you don't have to disclose your condition in interviews, but if there's a resume gap and it's an explanation, I don't think it hurts to, right? Um,
Right.
that's maybe more personal advice than legal advice, but who would hold something against someone that was dealing with, um, a battle with breast cancer and is ready to get back to work, right? You would hope an employer wouldn't. And again, if you document that condition and they do use that against you, then um, that's going to be a potential legal claim against the employer. And I think, um, you wouldn't be hurting yourself by letting them know the explanation, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that could go either way. I've heard a lot of people discuss the hesitation to really bring it up because sometimes that is something that they will hold against you because you can't be sued by someone who is being wrongfully terminated for medical reasons if you just never hire the person with medical problems.
Right,
So it gets ahead of a problem before you even have one.
right,
Um, and I think a lot of people do fear that because if you have chronic illness, there's this immediate assumption, and not completely wrong, that you're going to be out of work from time to time dealing with illness. Maybe you're w- with my illness, we already know if I'm in a flare, you got to let me work from home. I'm not leaving my house before noon. I might be able to get out of here afternoon, but forget it before noon. It's just not going to happen. So you already know that there are times where you're not going to have me in an office before noon. And I think that sometimes employers do discriminate. Sometimes I think we're just more scared that they will, but
right.
it's always hard to tell. But like you said, it's hard to prove those things. So it goes back to your first piece of advice: document, document, document. And if you can keep that job, hold on to that job and keep documenting so that you don't get the resume gap.
Exactly. Yeah, that would be my
Yeah.
first recommendation. There, you're at least going to get some period of time off. So yeah, I wouldn't think that you'd have to resign. And heck, most companies, if you're dealing with something where you need to take off some time to fight it, I wouldn't see why they wouldn't. Grant you the time.
Depends on the industry.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now they may say it becomes unpaid after a certain point,
Hmm.
or maybe your job's not necessarily protected. Like, let us know when you're ready to come back, and we'll let you know what the status is. But at least you're staying on the books essentially as an employee, and it prevents
Right.
that
Right.
resume. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it could be scary for a lot of people. I worked in consulting and I've actually spoken to numerous people on this podcast who were in consulting and facing breast cancer, other cancers, chronic illnesses, and ended up being terminated suddenly when they tried to take their FMLA leave. So, um, I think that often people, when we have these fears, they're sometimes warranted, and especially depending on the industry, consulting is not really one for hiring people who don't want to work at least 60 hours a week and never take a day off. So, um, keeping in mind your industry, I think, is helpful.
Right.
So, you talked about document everything, communication. What other advice do you have for somebody facing a sudden illness or disability and trying to figure out, just navigate the workplace and what they need to do?
I think know your rights, be educated on them. Like I said, know what's out there, know what the FMLA is, and a lot of people think FMLA is only if you need to be out for like an extended period of time. Like, I need to be out for 6 weeks from X date to X date. It's not just that. You can use FMLA intermittently, meaning once you have it approved. Let's say someone dealing with some of the conditions that you are, Brandy. Let's say, and you just need to have a day off due to a flare, then you can call out under your already approved FMLA. The paperwork usually says from your doctor, hey, may miss 3 to 4 days a month due to flare ups as necessary or whatnot. And you can miss time here and there and not be targeted for it. And even if you're not FMLA eligible, you still have protections under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if you do have a condition that has flare ups, you want to document that, even if you haven't been there a year or the employer isn't big enough. You want to let the employer know that I may need an accommodation of time off here or there, time off for doctor's appointments, and yeah, know your rights, and don't be afraid to be clear with your employer about what you're going through, and don't just say general things such as